USC is not dead in 2019. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, talking up the Trojans with their first road trip of the season, going out to Provo to take on BYU, coming off an impressive, at least final culmination to the game and pulling out a game in Knoxville against Tennessee last week, 26-23 in overtime. We got Pete Garrison on the line from Fox Sports. You can also catch him as a USC host on Blog Talk Radio. Pete, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. USC, like you said, is back alive and well, and LA is rumbling now in the college football scene.
I guess all you've got to say about KEDON SLOVIS is that after the game, he was given the honorary, holding the sword, going up, leading the band. Exactly. All you have to do is say that. If you get to be able to take on that honor as a freshman, then you did something special, and he did something special.
Yeah, I haven't seen – I mean, I guess JT did it a couple times last year, but I just have this image of Sam Darnold doing that a lot back in 2016 and 2017. But, yeah, I mean, this game was really historic. We're running out of descriptions for KEDON SLOVIS after that performance. 28 of 33, Mark. That's like an 86% completion percentage, 377 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks. And to kind of put that in comparison – I was asked how many times did Matt Barkley and Matt Leinart and Sam Darnold do that in their careers? Over 350 yards, 3 touchdown, no picks. The answer was never, 0. 3 NFL quarterbacks never did that. So, yes, it's his first start, and it's not going to happen every week where he's going to be that successful. But you can't just look at this game as a flash in the pan game. There has to be some substance behind that because you don't just go out and ball against a David Shaw-led defense in Stanford, who usually is pretty good. This year, maybe Stanford's a little different, but still, KEDON SLOVIS to have that type of a game in his first career start. He now leads the nation with an 83% completion percentage dating back to his first half he played when JT Daniels went down. And SLOVIS and that receiving core now is very dangerous. The air raid offense is in full effect, and it's just a question to see if USC can stay consistent, something they've struggled with the last couple of years. And it starts this weekend, which is going to be a hostile environment in Provo, Utah, BYU, but definitely not the toughest opponent on the Trojans schedule. So they're pretty confident heading into this one.
Yeah, there's no question it's not a vintage Stanford defense or Stanford squad in total, but at the same time, I would not be surprised if they turn in their typical 8-4 season or what's been typical over the last few years. It's a competent unit, and he tore them to shreds. And it was very apparent after Stanford was able to jump out of the gate with a 14-point lead that USC just used its weapons, used its superior speed, athleticism on the outside, and did exactly what we had discussed and were very intrigued by, seeing how USC would be able to operate against a true freshman quarterback and use that advantage. Could they be able to do it? And they did it beyond expectation.
Yeah, this wide receiver core is really special. Tyler Vaughns now has 16 catches through the first 2 games. That leads the entire Pac-12 conference. Amon-Ra St. Brown's an absolute stud. He had 2 touchdowns last week. Michael Pittman didn't even really get incorporated in the offense until that second half, but he still finished with 6 catches and 80 yards. And one name who hasn't seen his number called at all is Devin Williams, who actually just entered the transfer portal for USC. He was a big-time recruit in 2018. He's actually the number 16 overall player, and Oregon really badly wanted him. So I was just reading online earlier that Oregon now is going to try to go back after Devin Williams after just barely missing on him out of high school. He's entering that transfer portal, though, so he's going to be open and looking for other opportunities to play other teams because he saw 0 snaps in week 1 versus Fresno State, and then he had just 1 catch for 8 yards last week when USC threw for 377 yards, and he's only making 1 of those catches. So he's a very talented wide receiver. Keep an eye on him for the Trojans, but right now, I think USC is worrying about other things. They have their top 3 wide receivers. They have Velus Jones Jr., who's extremely fast and is their kick returner, also another slot receiver you can put in there. So this offense with Stephen Carr, Vavai Malapei, the offensive line was stellar. You can't say enough about them in that start against Stanford because Stanford was rushing just 4 men on most plays, which I think if they look back at it, if David Shaw looks back, he would have rather put a little more pressure on a freshman quarterback and not give him all the time because Slovis is really a true pocket passer. The guy learned under Kurt Warner. We talked about this last week. He used to throw in Kurt Warner's backyard. And Kurt Warner was quoted saying that I've never really had a quarterback at the high school level who asked this many questions about the game and wanted to learn as much as KEDON SLOVIS did. So this guy's definitely a little mature beyond his years. but he's still a freshman quarterback. He's still 18 years old. So nothing's going to be easy and smooth for him throughout this season. But so far, it's a pretty good start. And the Trojan offense and defense was firing on all cylinders.
Pete Gearson from Fox Sports joins us to talk USC football, with the Trojans coming off an impressive showing at home against Stanford, 45-20, after falling behind 17-3, taking on BYU on the road. Certainly the spotlight and the attention should go to the offense. It was outstanding. The defense, though, certainly held its own. If you hold Power 5 teams to 20 points, you're going to win probably 90% of the time in this day and age. And after getting a bit manhandled up front early, the defense certainly dug in and shut out Stanford, basically a couple field goals after the first quarter.
Yeah, it was an unbelievable scoring one, 42-3 from the second quarter on to end the game. And it was really all three layers of that defense that balled out and had a stellar game, from the line, from the defensive backs. Let's start with J2 Fele, who's actually from Utah, so he's going home this weekend. Should be fun for him. He had a couple great tackles for loss against the run, and he had a sack against the quarterback, who was Davis Mills, the freshman, or the backup quarterback as well. And then Drake Jackson, another freshman, number 99, a huge defensive end, had a couple unbelievable run stops, and he's just been a beast. Talano Hufanga, a safety now in a sophomore year, he had 10 tackles. And then Greg Johnson had the really big interception early in that fourth quarter that just sealed the game. That's his first career interception. So that defense, they're young, but they're starting to come together. They looked really good against Stanford. It's almost overlooked because SLOVIS had such a great game, but the defense was almost just as impressive. One thing, though, Mark, going into this weekend's game, Christian Rector, who's the senior defensive end, he lines up opposite of Drake Jackson. So you got two game wreckers right there on the line for the Trojans. Rector, though, has been struggling in practice this week with an ankle injury. Yesterday, he didn't practice, and Clay Helton says he's going to be a game-time decision on Saturday in Provo. It is going to be 86 degrees in Provo. It's not going to be one of those cold games in Utah, so it's going to be a nice summer day in Utah, but Christian Rector, game-time decision, and he's a big part of that USC defense.
BYU hosting USC in week 3. There aren't really marquee matchups across the country, but just a lot of decent games, a ton of decent games. Nothing of the Texas LSU type variety. Get your week 3 predictions down at the description section below. Voice of College Football Community. You get my week 3 picks, 31-20 against the spread the first 2 weeks. And if that will include, of course, the Trojans as a 3-point favorite, 3 to 4 point favorite in Provo, taking on the Cougars. We got Pete Gearson on the line from Fox Sports to help us break it down. BYU should be on a high as well. With just seconds left in the game, it appeared as though they'd be headed home at 0-2. They took on Utah in week 1. They played, I watched the game, it was 30-12, but they were probably the better team for the first half, but started turning the ball over, and Utah took hold and won at 30-12. They go out to Tennessee. They're in a slugfest, not a pretty game, not a lot of offensive weaponry showcased in that one. And they get a busted play and a coverage by Tennessee, and that's the state of Tennessee football right now. They pull off a miracle play in the final seconds to get them to overtime, and they win it. So BYU's got to be on a high, and you wouldn't expect a letdown because, number 2, they're going to be at home, and number 1 and number 2, USC's in town, so no reason to let down. So USC probably going to get a BYU team that's feeling pretty good about itself and going to be ready for the Trojans.
Exactly. It's going to be a hostile environment. BYU is going to be happy to come home with that win, like you said, in double overtime over Tennessee. And they have a pretty good quarterback, Zach Wilson, who actually set the school's freshman efficiency passing record last season. He directs the offense, and he's really a Pac-12 quarterback caliber. You know, he could play at a big Power 5 school, so he's a solid guy. But their entire offense actually runs around Tyson Williams, who's really starting to make his mark as BYU's featured back, and that's kind of the focal point for USC's defense this week, who they're focusing on in practice. He had 92 yards last week and 2 touchdowns on just 17 carries versus the Volunteers. And he's a big reason why BYU was able to get that win and move to 1-1. Remember, BYU was 7-6 last year, so they went to a bowl game, and they had some impressive wins. They were only 1-3 versus the Pac-12 last year, so they're not exactly great against this Pac-12 conference. And USC's only played them now twice. This will be their 3rd matchup. Last one was back in 2004. Lendale White ran all over BYU in Provo. So not much of a school history here, but BYU just have 18 returning starters. And they have, like I said, a talented quarterback, a talented running back. They have a 2017 freshman All-American and tight end Matt Bushman. So they have some pieces on offense to compete. I think USC should be favored in this one, but it could come down to the wire. It could come down to who's going to limit the mistakes. As you mentioned, BYU had a chance against Utah, but Utah's defense is an absolute beast, and BYU couldn't limit the turnovers, couldn't limit the problems and mistakes in that loss. But I think it could be a close one. I think USC should be able to pull this out, but don't look away from BYU. They've always had a talented team.
Yeah, BYU, they always put together what I consider to be the oddest and the most unusual schedule in the country. And it basically, because they're in a unique situation like Notre Dame, but not having the stature of Notre Dame and being able to schedule whoever they want, they really load up the September schedule like probably the toughest schedule in the country in September, because that's when everyone's playing non-conference games. So it's Utah, Tennessee, USC, Washington. Looks like a Pac-12 schedule the first month of the season, and that's pretty typical of BYU. And then, they're loading up with top 25 type opponents, and this is every year. And then by November, they're playing basically a Mountain West schedule. They're picking off those teams at whatever rate they can when they've got bye weeks, and they've got the Toledos and South Floridas and Liberties, and they're all over the place just trying to piece together an independent schedule. But it's BYU, it's USC on Saturday, and we got Pete Harrison on the line from Fox Sports to help us break it down and also look at the rest of the Pac-12. A fairly important week for the conference. Again, no games stand out like what we could have coming up later with USC if they continue to win, taking on Notre Dame, for example, and what we had in week 1 with Oregon taking on Auburn. But a lot of games in which the Pac-12 can maybe slowly, it's not going to come in one shot, one game with that kind of respect against that type of an opponent, but in increments, if they win the majority of these games, Pete, maybe they can get back some national perception. And it starts tonight with Washington State taking on Houston. And again, no one's going to bat an eye at Washington State going to Houston, winning the game. But if they win impressively versus avoiding the upset, which of course would be a real knock on the conference, the Cougars again looking to vie for the Pac-12 North Championship.
Yeah, it's Cougars versus Cougars. Washington State Cougars versus the Houston team, and it's Anthony Gordon, the quarterback for Washington State, who's really been impressive. They've had a bit of a soft schedule to open up the season. They've had a big win versus New Mexico State and Northern Colorado in their first 2 weeks. They scored 57 one week and 59 the next. So they're coming in averaging 58 points per game and their 2 wins. But this is their first real test on the road on a Friday night. Bit of a short week for Mike Leach. But I think they should be able to handle Houston. Washington State comes in ranked 20th in the country, and that air raid offense should handle Houston. But you're right. There's a lot of perception factors going into this week. I think it actually starts with the USC BYU game, because now all of a sudden USC, just a week ago, we were here in LA saying, the season may be lost. JT Daniels is out for the year. Jack Sears just wants to transfer. KEDON SLOVIS is really the second string quarterback KEDON SLOVIS was a 5-7 quarterback his senior season in high school. I mean, the guy wasn't even a winning high school quarterback. And that kind of goes to show you this whole 3-star, 5-star, debacle that we always have. Oh, he's only a 3-star quarterback. Well, yeah, he just threw for 380 yards against Stanford. So maybe we shouldn't have to put so much weight on the stars. Just have the guy go out and play. So with Washington State facing Houston tonight, that's a big game. I think USC has to beat BYU to keep the Pac-12 in the playoff conversation. There's really only a couple teams in the Pac-12 that can make a case for the playoffs if they, win out or go one loss, and it's Utah and USC right now, because Washington lost versus Cal last week at 3 a.m. And then the week before, of course, Oregon couldn't take down Auburn. And it's going to be tough. Even if Oregon has a great second half or rest of the season, it's going to be tough to say, unless Auburn's a top 5 team, hey, they lost against Auburn, let's put them in that conversation. So those are the 2 big games. Stanford is down in Central Florida, who's ranked in the top 20. That's going to be a hostile environment. It's going to be kind of a bounce-back game for Stanford. They do have KJ Costello back. They're All-American second-team starting quarterback who missed last week versus USC, so that should be a good one for Stanford, but they fell out of the top 25 after that beat down by the Trojans. And then Cal welcomes in North Texas to Berkeley. North Texas, of course, is the old home of offensive coordinator for the Trojans now, Graham Harrell. So they'll run a high-tempo air raid offense. But we'll see if Cal now can kind of enter the conversation, sneak in that top 25 after their win versus UW. And then Arizona State's at Michigan State, who's ranked 18th in the country. It's going to be a hard game for Arizona State. They're a young team. They have Jaden Williams, that freshman quarterback under Herm Edwards. And it's always tough to play in East Lansing, Michigan, especially this time of year. So there's some interesting games in the pack definitely this weekend.
Yeah, as you mentioned, you make a good point in regards to the power shift. Not necessarily that the South Division's better than the North. The North was certainly much better last year and expected to be this year. But in terms of the power brokers that hold the conference's status and college football playoff hopes, it's completely shifted south because of the upsets of Washington against Cal, Stanford losing, and of course Oregon non-conference loss. So you would seemingly, unless they go on a run, somebody goes on a run of winning 9-10 consecutive games to get themselves back in it. USC and Utah have the clearest path to a college football playoff. I know that's far removed from what they should be concerned with right now, but in terms of looking at the numbers and the path, that's where it stands right now. And you mentioned, I'll just kind of gloss over these as well. Central Florida, Stanford, I thought that was just a tremendous matchup to be scheduled in the preseason. Now with Stanford not looking so good last week, we'll see if they're able to bounce back. I got to think that Stanford has so much pride, KJ Costello back at quarterback, that they're going to make that a game. They're a 9-point underdog on the road at UCF, and weather could be an issue there. We talked some UCF football the other day, and they've got another hurricane blowing through there, so we'll see the timing of that. You mentioned Michigan State basically doesn't give up a yard rushing the ball. They're just rock solid on defense, always are. Could be a bit of an ugly affair against Arizona State, but the Sun Devils pulled off the upset in Tempe last year. Of course, Jaden Daniels, freshman quarterback, getting his third start. Hawaii's had a nice little run against the Pac-12 with the win against Arizona most recently, and Oregon State. They get their shot at Washington. The game that kind of got lost in the wee hours of the morning on Sunday morning last week against Cal, when I pride myself in watching every college football game and making sure I don't go to bed until they're all complete. Well, that one I had to tap out on. I
heard you went to bed. You stayed up for
this wasn't going to happen.
No, I didn't even stay up for that, man. The lightning delays and everything up in Washington.
I think it ended at 4:22 Eastern time.
And the best part was the Seahawks game the next afternoon was perfect sunshine, no problem.
Yeah. The best thing that happened for me was that I woke up and saw that, not that I picked Cal to win, but I took the 14 points, certainly. Right. And as you mentioned, Cal turns around and takes on a game North Texas bunch that's always ready, and certainly has been a better program in the group of five in recent years. And Oklahoma, UCLA, on the surface, the brand names should speak to, oh, wow, got to watch this game. But man, UCLA's awful.
I was at the Rose Bowl last weekend with the Pac-12 networks with Ted Robinson and Yogi Roth. And man, we talked about it off air too. First of all, one of the lowest crowds in the last 25 years at the Rose Bowl. It was a third San Diego State fans. You have to give them a little bit of slack because school's not in session for these quarter system schools. So the student section had all of 150 kids in it because a lot of them are still at home or on break or working, So school's not in session, not as many kids, but a 90-degree afternoon at the Rose Bowl, not a ton of fans came out. No home field advantage really for UCLA, and their offense just looks atrocious. Dorian Thompson-Robinson is a great athletic player, but I don't think he's a great quarterback. I don't think he can throw the ball where he wants it. And Chip Kelly keeps saying he doesn't have the personnel to run an offense like he did at Oregon. But at some point, you have to put the blame on Chip Kelly and say, hey, man, you're calling the plays, you're recruiting the players, and you got to get something going here because it is a big-time program, and there's nothing to show for right now. I mean, I was talking to Yogi Roth about it, and if you look at the top 6 receivers for UCLA, I don't think any of those guys would be the number one option or even starting at some of these schools like a USC or like a Oregon. I mean, USC has a top 5 receiver group that would all be the number ones at UCLA. So it's not only that they're not executing, they just don't have the personnel right now, Mark. And it's a little worrisome because I don't know how deep this UCLA team can go, how far they can spiral. And I'm hoping they can just keep within 30 points versus Oklahoma and Jalen Hurts this weekend, because the Rose Bowl is probably going to be half Oklahoma fans, if not more.
It is odd because Jim Mora did a decent job there, but obviously his worst seasons were at the end. That's one of the reasons he was dismissed. But his recruiting classes weren't great, but they were top 15 to 25 level. And then Chip Kelly's bringing in the same level of talent, at least that first recruiting cycle and a half. There's been no player development, and Dorian Thompson-Robinson, as you mentioned, unless things dramatically change, you expect a young player possibly to struggle, especially when he's not getting the support around him. But he's just not delivering basic throws across the field of any variety. And it's just, man, putting up 14 points against two group of 5 teams consecutive weeks is it could be just really, really bad this year for UCLA, which we thought 3-9 was. But wow.
Yeah, 3-9 was, and then they showed some life last year at the end of the season. They beat USC at home, and I think they almost beat Stanford at home. They just lost by a single tally or a couple points, and they looked like they were trending in that right direction. They had a big time off season, and then they come out with a couple of duds, and I was reading the LA Times, it was like people are questioning what Chip Kelly was doing this offseason, because they look like they've regressed instead of progressed. So it'll be interesting to see if they can keep it anywhere within a few points against Oklahoma. I don't think they will, but down the road, hopefully they can make some progression, and then maybe, beat the likes of an Oregon State or a Arizona down the road.
Yeah, college football is better when USC's good. College football is even better when USC and UCLA get on the field and it means something at the end of the year.
Yeah.
No question about that. One of the great rivalries in college football. Pete Garrison on the line, Fox Sports, also USC Blog Talk Radio. So please join him there. You can hear right here the sample of insight and information from Pete. So we appreciate you stopping by, getting us set on USC and the rest of the Pac-12.
Yeah, Mark, the Pac-12 is trying to pick it up. Obviously, still not as strong as some of these conferences, but it's getting interesting. And as you mentioned, the Pac-12 kind of runs with the USCs and UWs being successful. So we'll see if they can come through this week and keep their rolls going.
Very good. We will stop it right there.